It is a Friday afternoon in November, and the balance on the banking app reads exactly $11.43. The rent is overdue. The car payment has been missed for the second month, and on the kitchen counter at home, a utility bill is stamped with a final notice in red ink. Marcus Webb is sitting in this parking lot because he cannot afford the groceries on his list. For the last 6 years, Marcus has worked as a senior logistics coordinator. His job is to manage complex systems. He is an expert at building safeguards, coordinating vendors, and ensuring that if one part of a supply chain fails, the entire operation doesn't stop. Marcus spent his career preventing systemic breakdowns for others, yet he is now watching his own life undergo a total structural collapse. 18 months ago, Marcus felt secure. He had a solid salary, full benefits, and the kind of stability that makes you believe you've reached a permanent plateau. That sense of safety led to a quiet complacency. He stopped developing new skills or looking for alternative income streams because he didn't think he needed them. In many ways, the perception of a safe career is the most dangerous stage of professional life. It masks a lack of structural resilience until it's too late to build a backup. The collapse began on a Tuesday morning in May when his company announced layoffs. Marcus was given a cardboard box and 60 days of severance pay. He applied to 43 jobs in those first 2 months. He secured 7 interviews, but the market was not interested in his specific experience at his previous salary level. He received 0 offers. When the severance ran out, he moved his emergency savings into his checking account. By September, those savings were gone. He took on part-time warehouse shifts and moving work, but the income couldn't cover fixed costs. Now, back in the present, he sits in a cold apartment with the heat turned off. He is no longer looking at his banking app. The math is too heavy to face. Financial ruin is rarely a single, sudden event. It is a slow decay, built one impossible month and one exhausted resource at a time. In engineering, a single point of failure is a system design where everything depends on one specific component. Because there are no redundancies, if that one component fails, the entire system is guaranteed to crash. This was the architecture of Marcus's life. His housing, his food, and his car payments were all supported by a single pillar, his salary from one employer. When the market rejected that single pillar, there was nothing left to hold up the weight. The failure cascaded instantly through every other part of his existence. Without backup systems or secondary income, Marcus's collapse was a mathematical certainty. The moment his one pillar fell, the rest of the structure had to follow. Marcus sits in his coat on the couch, processing a very specific kind of shame. He is an adult who has spent years solving logistics for major companies, yet he cannot solve the logistics of his own next meal. He has hit the absolute bottom of his single-pillar system. There is no longer any room for denial. On Saturday morning at 6:47 a.m., the weight of the situation returns the moment Marcus opens his eyes. But his focus shifts. He stops asking how to fix the immediate bills and starts asking the forensic question of how the system failed in the first place. He realizes he had built his entire life on a single foundation. He tells the empty apartment that he will never allow his survival to depend on only one thing ever again. Identifying the structural flaw in your life is the first step toward building something that can actually withstand a crisis. Marcus begins to look at his skills as independent assets. He knows how to coordinate complex vendors, manage tight schedules, and solve high-pressure problems. Instead of looking for another single employer to rent those skills to, he decides to offer them to multiple small businesses as a consultant. This is a redundant system. By working with several clients at once, his income is no longer tied to a single decision-maker. If one client leaves, the system stays upright. In the cold apartment, Marcus pulls out an old notebook. The $11 in his account hasn't changed, but he has replaced the paralysis of the night before with a specific business plan. True financial security isn't found in a safe job. It's built through diversification. By spreading his risk across multiple streams, Marcus is creating a structure where a single failure is a complication rather than a catastrophe. We are taught a very specific sequence for securing a livelihood. You carefully format a resume, submit it into a massive digital void, and then you sit down and wait. It feels like the responsible thing to do. But look closely at the mechanics of that process. You are taking your entire professional worth and handing it to a complete stranger, hoping they validate it. Marcus Webb followed these rules. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, trusting that the conventional path would yield a conventional result. Ultimately, this dynamic creates a permission economy. It requires you to actively surrender your agency, waiting for a gatekeeper to authorize your survival before you can move forward. This timeline tracks Marcus's exact yield within that system over 6 months. He submitted 43 separate applications. He sat through 7 interviews. That effort generated 0 offers. By November, the math caught up with him. He was sitting in a freezing apartment, wearing his coat indoors because he couldn't run the heat, with exactly $11 left in his bank account. Staring at the ceiling, he recognized the structural flaw in his life. He had built his entire existence around relying on one single thing. Just one employer, just one yes. If that single point collapsed, he had nothing underneath him. Hitting absolute financial zero strips away the illusion that a system is working. When the accepted rules leave you freezing with exactly $11, it becomes logical to abandon those rules. Marcus stopped drafting resumes. He sat at his kitchen table and wrote down 3 precise questions to audit what he actually brought to the market. First, what do I know how to do that people will pay for? He had hard skills in logistics and supply chain problem solving. Second, who actually needs it? He pinpointed growing small businesses and local e-commerce companies struggling to scale their operations. The third question was the operational hurdle. How do I reach those exact people right now with 0 budget? He spent a Saturday afternoon systematically dismantling his LinkedIn profile. He deleted the passive job seeker framing and rebuilt his identity as a proactive consultant. Framing the conversation around a specific operational fix changes the math for a business owner. A candidate is an unknown risk. A solution to a current problem is a necessity. At 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning, Marcus started hunting for local businesses that were showing public signs of operational chaos. He didn't look for job postings. He looked for distress signals, companies with negative reviews complaining about order delays, and social media posts apologizing for fulfillment issues. This diagram breaks down the architecture of his 12 outreach messages. He identified one specific problem and offered a free 30-minute consultation to fix it. No pitch, no price. By removing the pressure of a sale, this structure ignores traditional HR filters, connecting directly with the business owner feeling the pain. By Sunday evening, 2 out of the 12 prospects wanted to talk. In a single day, he generated more traction than 43 conventional applications had in 6 months. When you offer a specific solution to an immediate problem, the conversion rate accelerates because the value is obvious. The first call on Monday was with Sandra, an e-commerce owner balancing 3 warehouses and 2 fulfillment partners, using a spreadsheet system she described as being held together by prayers. Marcus spent the first 20 minutes listening. Then he spent the next 20 minutes giving her a precise, step-by-step roadmap of exactly how he would restructure it. Tuesday went similarly. He spoke with David, a restaurant owner plagued by a failing supplier. Within 5 minutes, Marcus diagnosed why the supply chain was breaking down and laid out the fix for an 8-month problem. After hearing the solutions, both owners immediately asked Marcus what his services would cost, and both agreed to his rate on the spot. Offering immediate, high-utility expertise changes the power dynamic. It proves the value of the work before a contract is even discussed. This growth was the result of a grueling schedule. For the next 3 months, Marcus worked early mornings and late nights, delivering on every promise and asking every client for a referral. By February, he had 6 clients. By June, he hired a contractor. He reached thousands online. By the end of the year, his firm's revenue exceeded his old corporate salary. He looked back at that cold November weekend and knew he had kept his promise. He had engineered a life that no longer relied on one person's permission to exist. Financial stability is architectural. It requires a wide foundation resting on multiple pillars of value, rather than a single check cut by a single employer. It is easy to look at those 2 initial responses from Sunday evening and attribute the success to luck. But luck doesn't diagnose a supply chain failure in 5 minutes. Marcus succeeded because of absolute specificity. He isolated exactly what he knew, identified who was hurting, and offered a clear path forward. True independence begins the moment you stop waiting for a gatekeeper to determine your worth and take your value directly to the market.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to completely redefine how you look at your own security, your career, and honestly what it actually takes to build a foundation that nobody can ever take away from you. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material called The Parking Lot and the Notebook. And let me tell you, it completely dismantles the lies we tend to tell ourselves about safety in the modern working world. So get focused, because what we're covering today might just change how you plan your entire future.
Right off the bat, I want you to picture this. You're sitting in a freezing November parking lot in your car. You pull out your phone, open your banking app, and boom, that is the number staring back at you, $11. This is exactly where our source material starts, with a guy named Marcus Webb. Now look, I don't want you to view this $11 as some kind of sob story. It's not a plea for sympathy, okay? In the context of our explainer today, this $11 is just raw data. It's the absolute rock-bottom baseline of Marcus's struggle. Literally, it's the number you stare at when you have no idea how you're even going to buy groceries for the week.
All right, Section 1, the illusion of stability, the foundation of the problem.
So let's fast forward exactly 2 years from that freezing parking lot. Marcus isn't sitting in his cold car anymore. Instead, he's standing in a hotel ballroom in Chicago, looking out at 300 entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and people who are basically sitting exactly where he used to be. He's up there to tell them how he got out. But before he can tell them how he escaped that parking lot, he has to explain the sheer weight of what put him there in the first place. We're talking 43 applications sent into the digital void with absolute silence, 7 grueling interviews, and 0 job offers. He looks out at this massive room of people and drops this absolute paradigm shift on them. The $11 was not the problem. The $11 was the result of the problem. I mean, what a massive light bulb moment, right? The money, or really the lack of it, was just a symptom. It was a fever. It wasn't the infection itself. The actual problem was a deeply ingrained flaw in how Marcus had structured his entire life.
Think about it. Marcus had spent 6 years of his life pouring all of his time and energy into a single, highly flawed foundation. One job, one salary, one source for absolutely everything. And the trap here, and it's a trap so many of us fall into, is that it feels incredibly safe. You get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you settle into your routine, and your brain tells you, hey, I am secure. But actually, scratch that, it was a totally false sense of security. He had created a single, devastating point of failure for himself.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between two concepts we almost always treat as the exact same thing: stability versus safety. Stability is what Marcus had for 6 years. But notice how stability actually belongs to someone else. It's entirely borrowed. And because it's borrowed, it can be taken away from you on a random Tuesday morning with a quick handshake and an empty cardboard box to pack up your desk. Safety, on the other hand, real safety, is a whole different ballgame. It is owned. It's something you build yourself with your own 2 hands. And most importantly, it is never, ever just one single thing.
Moving on to Section 2, the $11 result, the Saturday morning question.
Okay, so we're back in that cold apartment. Marcus is literally sleeping in his winter coat because he can't even afford to keep the place warm. But suddenly a shift happens. On a Saturday morning, he stops asking the panicked, desperate question of, how do I fix this? And instead, he asks a much more terrifying analytical question. How did I get here? He takes radical accountability. He finally realizes that relying on borrowed stability is exactly what led to the winter coat, the couch, and those $11. Which brings us to Sunday morning. Having accepted his harsh reality on Saturday, he builds a plan on Sunday. 1 notebook, 3 questions, 12 messages, that's the whole shebang. The absolute simplicity of this proves that you do not need a massive budget, some huge professional network, or a grand 50-page business plan to start building your own safety. You just need clarity, a piece of paper, and the actual willingness to act.
Which brings us to Section 3, a $9 beginning, the conference connection.
So we're pivoting the narrative back to that conference in Chicago. Marcus has just finished delivering a speech about the parking lot, the false stability, and his Sunday morning action plan. As the ballroom starts to empty out, a young woman named Priya hesitantly walks up to him. She has that very careful, almost nervous energy of someone who desperately needs to say something, but isn't entirely sure she has the permission to even speak up. She walks right up to him and says, I have $9 in my account right now. Wow. I mean, this is a stunning emotional callback to Marcus's own $11. She tells him she almost didn't even come to the conference that day because she wasn't sure if she could afford the train fare to get there and back. She is basically in her own version of the freezing parking lot. She is at rock bottom.
But here's the thing. Priya didn't just show up to complain. The night before, she sat down and identified just one concrete skill she had.
She researched 2 specific businesses she thought might desperately need that exact skill. And she drafted messages to them right there on her phone. She had already done the absolute hardest part. She'd figured out her own value. But she was just standing there, phone in hand, completely paralyzed by the fear of actually pressing send.
So Marcus looks at her. He sees himself from 2 years ago. He remembers his own Sunday morning with his notebook. He looks Priya dead in the eye, and he pushes her right over the edge of her hesitation. Send him, he tells her. She asks, right now? And he says, right now. You already did the hardest part. You can almost feel the tension in the room as she looks down at her shaking hands and finally taps the screen.
Now look at how this plays out over time. This timeline definitively proves that the methodology replicates. It actually works. On conference day, she presses send. When she asks Marcus now what, he simply tells her to wait, and while she waits, write 3 more. Fast forward 6 months later, Priya sends Marcus a message on LinkedIn. From those initial actions, she got 2 responses, and 6 months out, she has 4 paying clients. The distance between $9 and 4 clients was bridged by nothing more than taking immediate, unpermitted action.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, Building Real Safety, the most powerful place to start.
Let's zoom out from Marcus and Priya for a second. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about universal truths. The moment everything changes in your career or your life is almost never the cinematic moment you think it's going to be. It's rarely a massive job offer falling out of the sky or some sudden influx of investment capital. The real moment of change is usually a quiet, difficult decision made when your back is firmly against the wall. So let's systematically dismantle the excuses that keep so many of us stuck. To build your own safety, you do not need more money. You do not need more time. You absolutely do not need someone else to believe in you or validate you before you begin. And you for sure do not need a perfect, foolproof strategy. Waiting for those things is just waiting for someone else to hand you stability. And well, we already know how fragile that is. Because the source material leaves us with this profound realization. Read it carefully. When you have nothing, you also have nothing to fear. Let that sink in for a second. Hitting rock bottom, staring at $11 or $9 in a bank account feels absolutely terrifying, but strategically, it is your ultimate advantage. When you have lost the illusion of stability, you are completely free to act without the fear of losing it. You are finally clear-eyed enough to see exactly what you need to build.
So I'm asking you directly, right now. You have the exact same tools Marcus had. You have the same tools Priya had. 1 notebook, 1 Sunday morning. What are you going to do with yours? Stop waiting for someone to offer you a salary. Stop asking for permission from the world to be considered valuable. You have to prove it to yourself first by doing the work when no one is watching and absolutely no one is paying you yet. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Honestly, it's the only takeaway that truly matters. You are not stuck. You are just at the beginning of a different story. So grab a notebook and go build something that belongs to you. Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer. I'll catch you next time.